So today we're having a play with another workhorse of a palette, and this time we're looking at our earth tones. So we've got our yellow ochre, our burnt sienna, and the useful addition of ultramarine blue. I've got to say I was really tempted to restrict myself here and use a black instead, but with that ultramarine it's going to let us get a range of blues and greens that obviously we wouldn't get without it. Now, with the yellow ochre and the burnt sienna, they're both obviously leaning towards orange already, and you can see how closely related they are when I'm mixing them here. But where it's going to start to get really exciting is mixing that burnt sienna and the ultramarine, which gives us a huge range in between, and at one point is actually going to produce a black or a very dark grey at least. A lot of people like to pre-mix these two and keep it as part of their palette. Just, it saves you that extra step of having to mix a yellow and a red together to make a black. It's a very convenient way to mix it. And what you'll also notice here is a complete lack of purples. That burnt sienna is such a neutral orange, and then combined with the ultramarine, it's such a complement that it skips out on that purple colour entirely and it goes straight to that black. So that's something you're not going to be able to get with this palette. That's one of its first restrictions. You'll also be able to see here the kind of greens that you're getting from this. Even its most vibrant green is a really muted kind of olive colour, and all the other greens we're mixing after that are really subdued, really deep colours. It would be really tempting at this point to switch out the yellow ochre for something more vibrant. And with a bit of control, obviously that's always an option. It's going to give you a wider range of greens, but the point of what we're doing here is obviously a limited palette. We want to look at the restrictions that are imposed by these colours. And where this palette really comes into its own is in those tertiary colours, and we're going to start mixing them up here. And the range for these paints is really restricted, but the beauty of this particular palette is there's a really kind of nuanced shift between certainly the tertiary colours that you can mix up. And I certainly think it's worth you experimenting with these. They're all really cheap paints. They're Series 1, and even if it's just kind of student quality paints that you're picking up, there's nothing wrong with that. You throw these down in great quantities and mess it all around and see what you can come up with. And when you haven't got a fear of wasting the paint, you're going to allow yourself to play a lot more with it. I'm guilty of that as well. I think I end up buying really expensive artist quality, highly pigmented paints, and then I'm just so afraid to use them. I'll use these tiny quantities of it, but really, some of the beauty of these acrylics and oil certainly is the textures that you can get from them, and you get kind of too scared to use a lot. You put a tiny bit out, and all these wonderful mixes that you can make, you don't get around to it because you've used all the paint up before you even get there. So maybe that's some good advice for today, is go out and buy some really cheap student quality workhorse paints of yellow ochre and burnt sienna and ultramarine and your white, and just go crazy with it and throw out massive quantities and make these really textured massive pieces and get stuck in, chuck it on your painting, mix the paint in your palette, mix it on the canvas, whatever, just to really get into all these subtle greys and browns and things that you're going to see me mixing here, but I'm using these tiny quantities while telling you to use huge amounts, but you see the point of what I'm saying. But then again, even doing something like this before, doing these little experiments just so you can see the range, it's really it's given me a much greater understanding of what I could achieve with it. So when I'm starting out painting and I'm thinking, what kind of atmosphere do I want to build, I'm able to look at this. I put this next to the page that we did of the Zorn palette, and the difference between them is so stark. And maybe when you're thinking about colours, when you're pulling them out, not being able to see it directly in front of you. Artists were visual people, so being able to put these two next to each other, it was as clear as night and day is the difference between the two of them. And when I was thinking about what kind of painting I would produce, maybe it would make the decision a lot easier of which palette to use when you've done these experiments and when you've seen what you can achieve with each of them. And hopefully over time this information gets instilled into your subconscious. You'll probably build a palette of colours that you like to use all the time, But if there were other colours in your palette, you'd be able to look at them and know how they'd interact with those colours, the effects that they'd have, how they'd change the image that you're going to make in the end. I think that would be a hugely useful skill, and actually you'd save a lot of money by not going out and splashing out on some random colour that isn't really going to affect it that much. And that's all I've got to say today, really. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. It certainly has been for me. I've now got a better understanding of the earth colours in my palette and when to use them and when not to use them. I'm going to keep on making videos like this, switching up the colours, some more traditional palettes, adding in some really wacky colours to see how they interact. How would a fluorescent pink work in a palette? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. If you've enjoyed it, please feel free to comment or subscribe or whatever it is that people do on this thing, just so I know that there's people out there watching and enjoying it, or maybe you hated it. Feel free to share that as well. I don't know. And I'll see you soon for another video. Cheers. Bye.